हेलो दोस्तों। आज हम लोग स्टार्ट करेंगे लक्ष्मीकांत का 9th चैप्टर फंडामेंटल ड्यूटीज़। तो आइए हम लोग देखते हैं लाइन बाय लाइन फंडामेंटल ड्यूटीज़। थ्रू द राइट्स एंड द ड्यूटीज़ of the citizen are the correlative and the inspirable. The original constitution constituted only the fundamental rights and not the fundamental duties. In the other words, the framers of the constitution did not feel it necessary to the incorporate the fundamental duties of the citizens in the constitution. However, they incorporated the duties of the state in the constitution in the form of the directive principle of state policy. Later in 1976, the fundamental duties of the citizen were added in the constitution. In 2002, one more fundamental duties was added. The fundamental duties in the Indian Constitution are inspired by the Constitution of the Westphal USSR. Notably, none of the constitution of the major democratic countries like the USA, Canada, France, Germany, and Australia, and so on specifically contain a list of the duties of the citizen. Japanese constitution is the perhaps the only democratic constitution in the world which contains a list of the duties of the citizens. The socialistic countries, on the contrary, gave the equal importance to the fundamental rights and duties of their citizens. Hence, the Constitution of the erstwhile USSR declared that the citizens' exercise of their rights and the freedoms was inseparable from the performance of their duties and obligations. Swarn Singh Committee recommendation. In 1976, the Congress Party set up the Sardar Swarn Singh Committee to make the recommendation about the fundamental duties, the need and the necessity of which was the felt during the operation of the Central Emergency 1975 to 1977. The committee recommended the inclusion of the separate chapter on the fundamental duties in the Constitution. It stressed that the citizens should become the conscious that the addition to the enjoyment of the right, they also have the certain duties to the performs as well. As the Congress government at the center accept this recommendation and the enacted the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act in 1976. This amendment added a new part, newly Part 4A, to the Constitution. This new part consists of only one article, that is Article 51A, which for the first time specific code of the 10 fundamental duties of the citizens. The ruling Congress party declared the non-inclusion of the fundamental duties in the Constitution as a historical mistake and the claim that what the framers of the Constitution failed to do was being done now. Through the Swarn Singh Committee suggested the incorporation of the 8 fundamental duties in the Constitution. The 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976 included 10 fundamental duties. Interestingly, certain recommendations of the committee were not accepted by the Congress party, hence not incorporated in the Constitution. These includes 1. The Parliament may provide for the imposition of such penalty or punishment as may be considered appropriate for any non-compliance with the refusal to the observe any of the duties. Second, no law imposing such penalty or the punishment shall be called in question in any court on the ground of the infringement of any fundamental rights or on the grounds of the pregnancy to inconsistency meaning होता है to any other provision of the constitution. Third, duty to pay tax should also be a fundamental duties of the citizens. List of the fundamental duties. According to the Article 51A, it shall be the duty of the every citizen of India A to abide by the Constitution and the respect its ideas and the institutions, the national flag and the national anthem. B. To the cherish the follow of the noble ideas that inspired the national struggle for the freedom. C. To uphold the protect the sovereignty, unity and integrity of India. D. To defend the country and the render national service when called upon to do so. E. To promote the harmony and the spirit of the common brotherhood amongst all the people of India, transcending the religious, linguistic, and the regional or the sectional diversities, and to do revenues and practices derogatory to the dignity of the woman. F. To value and preserve the rich heritage of the country's composite culture. G. To protect and improve the natural environment including forest, lake, rivers and wildlife and to have the composition for the living creature. H. To develop the scientific temper, humanism and the spirit of the inquiry and the reform. I. To safeguard public property and to the exert the violence. J. To the strive the toward the excellence in all sphere of the individual collective activities so that the nation constantly rise in the higher level of the endeavor and the achievements. And K. To provide opportunity for the education to his child or ward between the age of the 6 and the 14 years. This duty was added by the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act 2002. The feature of the fundamental duties. The following points can be noted with the regard to the characteristic of the fundamental duties. A. 1. Some of them are the moral duties while the other are the civil duties. For the instance, cherishing noble ideas of the freedom struggle is the moral percept and the respecting the constitution, national flag and the national anthem is a civic duty. Second, they refer to the such values which have been the part of the Indian tradition, mythology, religions, and the practices. In other words, they essentially contain just a codification of the task integral to the Indian way of life. Unlike the sum of the fundamental rights which extend to all persons, whether the citizen or the foreigners. The fundamental duties are the contained in the citizen only and do not extend to the foreigners. 4. Like the directive principle of and the fundamental duties are also non-justiciable and the constitution does not provide for their the direct enforcement by the courts. Moreover, there is no legal sanction against the violation. However, the parliament is free to enforce them by the suitable legislation. Criticism of the fundamental duties. The fundamental duties mentioned in Part 4A of the Constitution have been criticized on the following grounds. A. The list of the duties is not the exhaustive as does not cover the other important duties like the casting votes, paying the taxes, family planning, and so on. In fact, duties to the pay tax was recommended by the Swan Singh Committee. Second, some of the duties are the wages ambiguous and difficult to the understood by the common man. For example, different interpretation can be given to the phrase like the noble ideas, the composite culture, scientific temper, and so on. Third, they have been described by the critics as a code of the moral precepts due to their the non-justiciable character. Interestingly, the Swan Singh Committee had suggested for the penalty of the punishment for the non-performance of the fundamental duties. For there, the inclusion in the Constitution was described by the critics as the superflux. This is because the duties included in the Constitution as the fundamental would be performed by the people given through they were not incorporated in the Constitution. 5. The critics said that the inclusion of the fundamental duty as an appendage is a part 4 of the Constitution has reduced the value and the significance. They should have been added after part 3 so as keep them and par with the fundamental rights. Significance of the fundamental duties. The spirit of the criticism and the opposition, the fundamental duties are considered a significant form of the following viewpoints. 1. The serve as the reminder to the citizen that while enjoying the rights, they should also be conscious of the duties they owe on to their country, their society, and the fellow citizen. Second, they serve as the warning against the anti-national and the anti-social activities like the burning the national flag, destroying the public property, and so on. Third, they serve as the source of the inspiration for the citizens and the promote a sense of the discipline and the committees among them. They create the feeling that the citizens are not mere separates but active participants in the realization of the national goals. Uh, for they help the courts in the examining and the determining the constitutional validity of a law. In 1992, the Supreme Court ruled that the determining the constitutionality of any law, if a court finds that the law is the question 6 to give the effect to a fundamental duty, it may consider such law to be reasonable in the relations. The Article 14, the equalities before the law, or the Article 19, the six freedoms, and thus save such the law from the unconstitutionality. 5. They are enforced by the law. Hence, the Parliament can provide for the imposition of the appropriate penalty or the punishment for the failure of the fulfilling any of them. H.R. the Gokhale, the then law ministers gave the following reason for incorporating the fundamental duties in the Constitution after 26 years of the inauguration. augmentation. In the post-independence India, particularly in the e- even the emergency in June 1975, a section of the people showed on the no anxiety to the fulfill their the fundamental obligation of the respecting the establish the legal order, and the provision of the chapter of the fundamental duties would have a sovereign effect of the this restless spirit who have had the host the anti-national subversives and the unconstitutional against in this the past. Indira Gandhi and then the Prime Minister justified the inclusion of the fundamental duties in Constitution, argued that there the inclusion would help the strengthen democracy. She said then the moral value of the fundamental duties would be not a smoother rights but the establish a democratic balance by the making the people conscious of their the duties equally they are the conscious of their the rights. The opposition in the parliament strongly opposed the inclusion of the fundamental duties in the constitution by the Congress government. However, the new Janta government headed by Moraji Desai in the post-emergency period did not annual fundamental duties. And notably, the new government sought the undemani change in the introduced the constitution by the 42nd Amendment Act 1976 through the 43rd Amendment Act 1977 and the 44th Amendment Act 1989 78. This shows that there was a eventual consensus on the necessity and the desirability of the including the fundamental duties the constitution. This is the more clear with the addition of the more fundamental duty in the 2002 by the 86th Amendment Act. Verma Committee observation. The Verma Committee on the Fundamental Duties of the Citizens 1999 identified the existence of the legal provision for the implementation of the some of the fundamental duties. They are the mentioned below. 1. The Prevention of the Insult, the National Honor Act 1971, preventing disrespect of the Constitution of India, the national flag and the national anthem. Second, the the criminal law in the force provided for the punishment for the increasing the enmity between the different section of the people, grounds of the language, race, and the peace, place of the birth, religion, and so on. Third, the Protection of the Civil Rights Act 1955 provides the punishment of the offence related to the caste and religion. Fourth, the Indian Penal Code IPC declares the imputation and the assertion of the prejudicial and to the national integration as the punishable offence. 5. The Unlawful Activities Prevention Act of 1967 provides for the declaration of a communal organization as the unlawful association. 6. The Representation of the People Act 1951 provides for the disqualification of the members of the parliament or the state legislature for the including to the corrupt practices, that is the soliciting votes and the grounds of the religions or the promoting the enmity between the different sections of the people on grounds of the caste, race, language, religion, and so on. 7. The Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 prohibits a trade in the race and the engaged in species. 8. The Forest Conservation Act of 1980 checks the indiscriminate the deforestation and the divergence of the forest land and non-forest purposes. Thank you very much. Subscribe.